The following program, Live and Learn, is made possible by Aging Partners. Find out more on their website at agingpartners@lincoln.ne.gov.
I'm Tom White, and today my guests are from the American Historical Society of Germans from Russia, one of Lincoln's treasures.
I'm Sam Truax, and today on Live and Learn, our guests are going to tell us about the backyard garden tour that is organized by the Wachiska Audubon Society chapter of southeastern Nebraska.
I'm Harlan Johnson, and today we're going to be talking about the 30th anniversary of the Cornhusker State Games. My guest will be the fellow who was the executive director for a number of years, Tom Ash.
I'm Lita Powell Drake, and my guest today on Live and Learn is John Stevens Berry. He's written a new book about Caril Fugate and the Starkweather murders of 1958. And it's called The 12th Victim. And he's making the claim that Caril Fugate was Charlie's 12th victim. Stay tuned, you'll love this one.
These guests and more on today's Live and Learn.
Hi, my name's Tom White, and my guests today are Norma Sommerheiser and Sherry Powelko from the American Historical Society of Germans from Russia. And I'd like to welcome Norma back. She was on our holiday show, and I'd like to welcome Sherry, and glad you're here today.
Thank you very much.
And the Society is an international organization dedicated to the discovery, collection, preservation, and dissemination of information related to the history, cultural heritage, and genealogy of Germanic settlers in the Russian Empire and their descendants. And so now, if you have not yet visited the museum that is at 631 D Street, this is one of Lincoln's treasures. I assure you, it's something to see. And I'm going back because there's so much to see and there's so many interesting exhibits. So, my first question is to Norma. And how long has the society been in existence?
Well, our society was founded in 1968 in Greeley, Colorado. And how it came about was there were people throughout the United States, some of them affiliated with colleges and universities, who were doing research, but there was no central repository for the information they had gathered. So they decided it was time to organize. And they founded the society there. It grew rapidly, and a few years later they moved it to a more central location in the United States, which was Lincoln. We now are an international organization, and we have grown to where we have the largest collection of information on the Germans from Russia that exists anywhere, that is anywhere in the world. And we're very proud of it. But our mission isn't over. We continue to search, and we have people who work with people in Russia, and we're getting more and more information all of the time.
Yeah, in those areas like along the Volga River and places like that?
Yes.
In Russia?
Our first German colonies in Russia were along the Volga River near Saratov. Then in 1804, Tsar Alexander offered land in southern Ukraine, near Odessa, near the Black Sea. So that way we have different variations on the same heritage. But the difference was in the Volga colonies, they lived communally. In the Black Sea region, they lived on farms like we do here, and they owned their own farms.
Have you visited either one of you?
No, I have not.
No.
But many of our members have. Some even to their ancestral village in Russia.
So the society's grown, and so now, when did the Germans from Russia immigrate to Nebraska?
Well, the first German settlement was in 1873, and it was our Black Sea people, many from Worms and Rohrbach, the villages in southern Ukraine, to Sutton, Nebraska. In 1870, Tsar Alexander, in an attempt to unify his country, made some orders or issued some decrees, one of which was everyone speaks Russian. Russian was to become the language of the schools. Our German people didn't want to be German. But one very important order that he issued was that all the able-bodied young men would serve a term in the Russian army, and that meant 6 years in the army. Catherine the Great had promised people when they emigrated from Germany to Russia that they would never have to serve in the army. So many of our people were looking for land, good land, and they found that in Clay County here.
And they originally had thought of returning to Germany, but found out there certainly wasn't free land in Germany.
Well, no, there wasn't. There wasn't free land, and Europe was a different situation. But the railroad had a lot of land. They had a surplus of land in the United States, and they sent agents to Russia to tell the people about it. Also, they had agents at the ports when immigrants, whether they were from Russia, Germany, wherever, there were agents in the ports offering to take them where there was good land, too. So that's how the railroad was marketing the surplus they had as well.
It's really interesting. Now, one of the things that I when I went to the museum, first of all, this museum is just, it's so interesting, and it's like walking back in time. That's how I felt. I felt like I was going into, but I wanted to know more about the museum, and Sherry, maybe you can tell me, when was the museum built?
Well, the museum was built in 1983. That was the final construction, and it was dedicated that year. And you'll remember we have 5 outbuildings. There's a chapel and the summer kitchen and the general store and the blacksmith shop and then the cow barn. And 3 of those buildings were built on site. The cow barn and the general store were actually brought in, and they were not built on site. But the last building was the chapel, and that was finished in 1984.
Okay.
So.
Yeah, I love that chapel. It's beautiful. All the buildings are just, there's something fascinating in each one of them. So now, I guess, now here's where I was going to ask you, because I had favorite exhibits. There were things that I really enjoyed. Now, what would be one of your favorite exhibits?
Well, I love the entire compound, campus, but I do have a couple of things that I really enjoy. And one of them is in our chapel. We have a Bible that is from 1720. And so clearly that was 56 years before the United States became a country. And so that's very special. Mm-hmm. And then another thing that I really love is in that general store there are noodle machines in there. And the reason I like that is because when I was a little girl, I would go to my grandma's, and on every flat surface there would be clean tea towels and noodles drying. There would be the fans, and they made homemade noodles. And so that struck home with me when I got to see those.
Do you remember some of the dishes that were made with the noodles?
Oh, sure. Chicken noodle soup, would be just right up there at the top. And then we just had buttered noodles with our roast beef dinner often. We call it broda, which is roast beef and roast potatoes and carrots, and we'd always have buttered noodles with it as well. Oh, nice. So it's great, really good.
So, and do you have some favorite exhibits?
Well, in our summer kitchen, there's a very large wooden bowl. Mm-hmm. And we think that is about the size of the bowl the German housewife had to use to make bread for her family. And of course they made bread every day. And in that bowl is some wheat. And our people were instrumental in bringing this strain of turkey red wheat to Kansas. And it was the right wheat for the right climate there. Mm-hmm. Another thing that I like and I have a lot of fun with, particularly when we have school children come on tours, 3 potato mashers in one of the cupboards. One of them is a light brown, and if you turn it around, it says, Louisville Slugger, Lou Gehrig on it. Our people were frugal.
I saw that. I love that.
Yeah.
And with one school group one day, I had made a special effort to tell them how to make mashed potatoes. I started with the peeling of the potatoes and the cooking and the whole thing. When I finished my dissertation, this little 8-year-old in the back said, "No, you don't. You go to the store and you buy them in a box." Another exhibit in the general store that gets a lot of attention is the cream separator. And it's not, they don't remember it fondly. One lady in a tour from Kansas said, "There's that thing," when she stepped in. And I thought, why is she so angry? What's wrong with this? Well, the story behind it was she had 3 sisters, so each of the girls had to take turns running the cream separator, one each day. And the trick to getting this cream separator to work right the next time is to get every one of the little discs that spin quickly while you're turning the handle on it perfectly clean, because if any residue of milk is left on that, it will sour and spoil the next batch of milk that's used. And her story was the next batch was spoiled and our dad knew who did it.
So she just did not
She
like
was
the
not,
cream
no, it
separator.
did not bring a happy memory for her.
Well, we were talking about the potato masher, and I loved when you showed that to me, and I saw that it was an old baseball bat that had been converted into the baseball bat must have been about that long,
Yes.
but now it was this long and had been changed into, and sure enough, it says Lou Gehrig on the side. That's a piece of history in two different ways. So, now I understand, Sherry, that you have a large convention
We do.
coming up.
Yes,
Can you
we
tell
do.
me about the convention?
Sure, I'd be happy to. We're having our 45th International Convention this year, and it's here in Lincoln. And it will be on July 7th through the 12th at the Cornhusker Hotel. And, excuse me, there'll be sessions on genealogy and on culture, history, folklore. And so that will be throughout the convention. And then we're also going to have some of the sessions will be on updates on new material that's come out of the archives in Russia. One of the things that we do, and one of our goals, is to gather more information, and we have some new information that we want to share at the convention. And so we have international speakers that are coming from Russia as well. We will be having some food demonstrations showing how to make, there's three.
Noodles?
Well, no, not noodles, but pretty close. We're going to have one that's for Grebel, which are a donut, a German donut. They're similar to beignets. They're fried like a beignet is, and they're delicious. And so blinas, which are similar to crepes. And then our third one is a sausage making demonstration. So those food demonstrations will be there. There are also tours. There's going to be a tour of the North and South Bottom, which is our stomping grounds. The North area down by the stadium, and then South Bottoms were up by Cooper Park, and so that will be one of the tours. There's another one to Sutton, and then one to the Lauritsen Garden in Omaha, and then also to, let me see, I'm forgetting something. The Museum of American Speed, the Speedway Motor Museum will be one of those tours that we have. So, and then we'll have our headquarters will be open, and people can come and do genealogical research, and then the outbuildings that you got to tour and our museum as well will all be open and available for people to come and see.
That sounds fun.
Yeah, it's going to be a great time. Really good.
It was another one of the exhibits, the horses.
The horses.
Yeah.
Yes.
Can you tell me about the
That's a good
horses,
one.
either one
You
of
should
you?
talk about that. Yeah, please do. It's great.
Well, the story behind the horses was it was made by a man who lives in Berrien Springs, Michigan, some years ago. It's 4 teams of horses on a platform which revolves, and it's hooked up to a belt which drives the fanning machine, or the fanning box. Fanning mill is where the wheat, freshly cut wheat, was put into one end of this, and then the belt drives it, the mechanism inside. It rotates, the wheat comes off of the stalks, the straw flies out the back of the box, and the wheat drops down into the bottom of the box. This was made by Mr. Herbert Engel. Mr. Engel is now 107 years old.
Wow.
And his daughter serves on our board of trustees, and each time she comes for a meeting, she makes it a point to visit him, and he always asks about his horses. And it is one of the favorite things, too, something animated like that for children. They love that. And Mr. Engel was very disappointed this winter. They had a tremendous amount of snow in Berrien Springs, so much they didn't know where to put it anymore. And he was disappointed because the people in the retirement home where he lives wouldn't let him go outdoors for his daily walk.
That's great. Well, I want to thank you both so much for coming today, and my guests have been Norma Sommerheiser and Sherry Puelko from the American Historical Society of Germans from Russia, and I'm Tom White, and remember, it's never too late to live and learn.
I'm Sam Truax, and today my guests are going to tell us about the backyard garden tour that's organized by the Wachiska Audubon Society chapter of southeastern Nebraska. The primary organizer of that is my guest, Ann Senkbeil, who's the tour committee chairman. And also joining us is Dr. Ben Vogt, who is a Wachiska chapter director and also authority on habitat gardens. Ann, tell us a little about when and where this year's garden tour will take place.
It is always on Father's Day, so we've kind of set a tradition. This year it's June 15th, and it's from 11 a.m. to 4 p.m., and we have 7 sites all across the city that are just amazing.
Well, this year's tour also marks somewhat of a milestone in the tour's history, doesn't it?
Yeah, 25 years. I cannot believe we've done this 25 times, but we have. So it's our anniversary, and we're really excited about it. We've chosen some of the old gardens that we had in the past that have gone through some major changes, and they're going to be on again, and they're totally different. That's the thing about Nebraska gardening. It's always a change. So it's going to be really, really interesting this time.
Yes, at least it's going to have some older gardens. Well,
yeah.
The tour originally was called the Backyard Habitat Tour because it emphasizes gardens that accommodate birds and wildlife. That's kind of an interest of yours, Dr. Vogt.
Yeah, backyard, gardening for wildlife, for insects especially, birds, insects. We all like to see the butterflies. We all like to look at the different birds that come into our gardens. Yeah, big passion of mine. I think it's really important that we all garden for wildlife.
Do you really see an increase in the interest for habitat gardens, Ben?
There's a big increase, I think, especially in the last year or two. I think I've seen this. I don't know if Ann's seen it, but I certainly have seen it. A lot of people are interested in even going to the nursery and buying plants that aren't covered with pesticides, that can be harmful to bees and other pollinators. So people are starting to learn the benefit of plants, native plants, and how those plants are raised.
So what can people who go on this tour expect to see, Ann?
Well, we try to make sure that we have things that birds would need, like water, shelter. Lots of shrubs in Nebraska are a good shelter. You don't have to have huge trees. And then some sort of food source. But they're amazing plants on these gardens. And they should be labeled, and the gardeners will be there so you can ask questions.
Yes,
and people can bring their cameras and take pictures of something they've always wanted to have, and then they can remember how it worked in that garden.
Well, I think to some degree it has some historic significance in as much as the Maple Lodge is a historic building, and so would be the fact that the Gorensons actually rebuilt their garden to match what the original construction was at the time. So
they found the plans in, I think, a drawer in the library when they bought the house, and it was the original set of plans for the house, and so they've redone the garden to match the plans. It's really a neat thing.
So that could be some 1919 plants or something that you'd have to go to Bend to find or something like that, huh?
Well, they go to Buffalo, New York every year, and it must be a similar climate somehow because they bring back lots of ideas from there and things that they plant. Piedmont, I think, is kind of a special habitat of its own. It has a different growing system than some parts of town.
Well, I do think we've got some pictures of the gardens in the past that we'll show the viewers here from time to time. How would people get information on where to go to see the tours? Yeah?
It's going to be in the newspaper, and it's going to be in the Wachiska newsletter, and they can call the Wachiska office. And
that office is 402-486-4846 is a place where people can call, and they would tell you where to start. And we also have a list of the 6 or 7 gardens that will show up to the viewers.
And if they want to, Sunken Gardens is our community space this time, so that'd be a good place to start because they would have maps there and a list of the gardens if they don't know.
That's a good point, that most of the time when you have the tour, you do have a public space and a bunch of private spaces that people can't really see except by going on the tour, right?
That's right.
Yep. Can folks develop a habitat that's for specific species like birds or butterflies or pollinators, Ben?
Well, sure you can. I mean, one of the best things you can do is plant milkweed for monarchs. Monarch butterfly numbers are down drastically, just right on the edge of vanishing for us in the eastern U.S. So milkweed is a host plant for monarch caterpillars, and if you start researching native plants, Nebraska State Arboretum or other sites, you can find host plants for caterpillars and specific shrubs and trees that birds like to get berries from. So hopefully you can find some of that stuff on this tour.
Yes, hopefully we see that. And otherwise, sometimes you can help people out with that, is my understanding.
Yep.
It's you and others, too.
Yes.
So, yeah. So when people are taking this tour, they might get some ideas of this is the kind of thing that they have in the garden, and that brings up to your point that the homeowners are usually there to answer questions and say, my garden attracts birds, or I planted it because I like these flowers, or whatever they have.
Exactly. And it's wonderful to find a new plant you haven't seen before. It's so exciting, and gardeners are the best people ever. They're so wonderful on the tour. They don't step on anything, they know what to do, but they're really curious and they love to find out new things, and like I said, take pictures of them so then you can take it to your own garden center, wherever. Because we get people from all across the state, not just from Lincoln. We get people from everywhere, even Iowa. We've had Iowa and Kansas people too. So, and lots of groups, especially women's groups that have some kind of club and they need a meeting, then they'll pick a garden tour to come and do, and that's really fun.
So increasing the number of gardens in an area would really increase the number and types of wildlife that show up in your garden because it has surrounding areas.
Yes.
But it could be a challenge for a backyard tour committee to find gardens to include in the future tours, because you can't just go into everybody's yard and take a look and see what they've done.
And lots of people have had trees die this last year. Lots of trees in Lincoln have died, and lots of yews had some winter killed this year. So we've had a hard time trying to find things, but that's just the beauty of it, because then if you had a huge stand of trees and they all had to be cut down, now you've got sun gardening that you can do. So it's better. We love to have people volunteer their gardens, so we can, they can call the office or call me, I guess, but it's really wonderful to have people introduce us to their space. But we do drive up and down streets all summer long and look for, because sometimes if the front yard's interesting, then maybe we can ask to go see the backyard.
Again, we definitely invite people to call the Wachusca office or Ann, so that they can nominate their own yard if it's a good yard, and or nominate their neighbor's yard if they don't want people walking in their yard. That's the way to do it. So, and again, the interest in birds, Audubon is involved in this tour because of their interest in birds, and in the case of birds, there's a declining habitat all over for certain types of birds. So that's how Audubon is always interested in a habitat tour like this one. So, well, I could talk on this subject a little bit longer, but I want to thank my guests, Ann Sinkbell and Ben Vogt. Thank you very much for being here. Live and Learn will be right back. Remember, it's never too late to live and learn.
I'm Harlan Johnson. In 2014, this is the 30th anniversary of the Cornhusker State Games. Now, I was involved with the first 2 years of the games, and then was out of it for a while. But the people like Dr. Hammer, Bill Smith, and Jerry McGinn, they realized that they needed an executive director, so about a couple of years into the organization, they knew a guy named Tom Ash, who was the sports writer for the Omaha World Herald. He was a very likable guy. He knew sports, all of them, and he had the connections. So they tapped him to become the executive director. And just like I tapped him to be my guest today on Live and Learn. Tom, thank you for coming and being on Live and Learn.
Thank you very much, Harlan. You're very generous in the credit there. But,
all right. Now, Those opening games, how many sports were there in that first few years?
Well, I wasn't around then, the first
Yeah.
2 years, but there were 19 sports in the first year, 1985, and I think they might pretty close to double that in the second year number of participants.
Now, the torch run, the opening ceremonies, and of course the games themselves have been the kind of the triangle of things that are important. Where was the opening ceremonies held?
Well, the first year was the first 2 years actually were at Ed Ware Track at the University of Nebraska. And then when I came along, we moved them out to Seacrest Field, which was a really nice fit for the opening ceremonies.
There's been a few changes over the years. Talk about some of those that you reminisce about, bring back some old memories.
Well, there have been so many. Going back to the early days, we were kind of living, excuse me, we were kind of living hand to mouth for a long time, and being a nonprofit organization, we had to scrounge a lot, and we had our offices in the old City Hall initially, and later moved to Trabert Hall on South Street. But a couple of things really stick out to me is back in those days we had to be pretty mobile compared to today. We didn't have any parking or room for thousands of people to pick up their packets and their team boxes. So we'd pack our whole office up and move to the state fairgrounds for about a month or so and operate out of there and then move back. And then we compounded that by, in the middle of my run, we did a winter games in Omaha. And so we had to run back and forth. We moved up there for about a month and housed at Exorbitant. And so we did a lot of packing and unpacking and moving and commuting, and the youngsters today, as they call them youngsters, they're getting older too, but my successors found a place with adequate parking and adequate space where they can do all the packet pickup out of their offices now. It's out on Highway 77 north of Cornhusker Highway. And so that, I'm sure, has made life more livable for them. And then back in the early days, we had paper entries, and they were mail-in entries, and over 80% of your entries each year would come in within the last 3 days of the deadlines. And so you're inundated with entries. And we had a couple of wonderful volunteers named Steve and Diana May, who Steve had designed our computer and our data entry programs, and Steve and Diana would sit up all night doing data entry, and it's an enormous job. And but now 90% of their entries come in online. So that's a pretty simple deal.
Well, now you talked about packing things. You got 10, 12,000 athletes, and you've got their entry forms, and you got T-shirts for all of those.
Well,
so
all
when
the
you're talking about
team
packing,
boxes, you're a lot of volume there.
Yeah.
And so we needed a lot of room to move. I might mention, Harlan, we're talking about the early days, that one of the first things I did, and probably one of the best things I did, is I had breakfast one day with Phil Scoe, who was the superintendent of Lincoln Public Schools, and Dave Myers was on the school board at the time, and Virgil Horn, who was the athletic director for Lincoln Public Schools. And at that morning, we forged a partnership, which was so valuable in the development of the state games and the continuity and the longevity of the state games for all these years. And we moved the opening ceremonies out to Seacrest, as I said, and put as many of our activities in the Lincoln Public Schools for really good bargain
Oh yeah, for a
rates.
good price, rental
so
of gyms.
It was a
and
true
space.
partnership, and you could never have asked for anything, any more joyful relationship that we had with the administration and the.
Now, you mentioned the Winter Games. That's one of the things that come and is gone after a couple of years. What are some other sports that we've had that have come and gone?
Well, I'm not sure anything is gone. We started out with 19 sports, and now it's up to over 60.
Yes.
So it's grown. Part of that's been for the economics, as I mentioned. It was hard. It was a hard go in the early days, but as we built the numbers, the business community really rallied around the state games because they could see the economic benefit to it and invested in it. But
well, that's one of the selling points when you're talking to businesses about supporting the games is the economic of all of these people coming to Lincoln, filling the restaurants and the hotels.
And that's really one of the reasons why we kept adding sports. We wanted to provide more opportunities for Nebraskans to participate in this, but we were trying to get a corporate sponsor for each sport. So the more sports you have, the more opportunities to partner up with the state games that the businesses had and helped us pay the bills. So, which is also one of the reasons we went to where we started the Winter Games in Omaha, which we loved. We set up operations at Exarban, did our opening ceremonies on ice, but we wanted to get the Omaha business community involved, and so we went up there, but we just could not make it work financially, and it was hurting our efforts in Lincoln.
The rest of the program,
So we reluctantly had to shut that down, and
now. You've seen a number of prominent people that become prominent athletes that have grown up through the games. Some names that you want to drop?
Oh, golly, there's so many of them. Erica Anschutz is one of my favorites.
Sure.
She's a world-class archer, and she fired up the torch with a flaming arrow at the opening ceremonies.
The classic event of the opening ceremonies.
And Angie Henry was a young lady from Bellevue, went to university, won NCAA long jump championship. The Kubik sisters from Cambridge were great basketball players at the university. Kurt Tomaszewicz from Shelby was a gold medalist in the Winter Olympics.
Olympic star.
Bob sledding. I suppose that Scott Frost played quarterback at university and defensive back in the NFL. And his mother, Caril Frost, was an Olympic discus thrower. I guess one of my favorite memories was seeing Scott was playing for the Jets at the time and he's throwing the shot down at Lincoln High, and across the way his mother's throwing the discus, and this is cool.
Yeah. There you got a family affair, right there. Yeah. Now, the games are basically run by volunteers, thousands of volunteers. And there's some of those that are kind of the cream of the crop that have been around for a long time. There's, of course, one man that we depended on for years. Tell us a little bit about a guy named Murph Tinius.
Well, Murph has been a favorite of yours and mine for many, many years. Dear friend, dear heart. And we lost Murph a couple of years ago. And he was a member of the original opening ceremonies committee and was there throughout, and put in an enormous amount of time, and he recruited his son Dave. As Murph started slowing down a little bit, Dave started picking up more of the load, and he's a force on the opening ceremonies committee now. And I met Murph's grandson working at the opening ceremonies a couple of years ago. But I think maybe the most important thing that Murph contributed was every year he would go over to the Pink Sisters convent and talk the sisters into praying for the good weather for the opening
Very
ceremonies.
Successful too.
And you'll never convince me that wasn't the key, because amazingly we never lost an opening ceremonies to weather.
I saw it rain just a few hours after it was open, rain during the day,
really
but the opening ceremonies?
Really amazing. One year we had a tornado that went right around Lincoln, and we just saw the threatening clouds. And another year it rained all day, buckets, and late in the day it cleared off. It was a lovely evening, but the field was a marsh, but we got it in. And then another year it threatened throughout the ceremonies, and as soon as we got the cauldron lit, people were walking to their cars in the parking lot and got soaked. So
now Murph, of course, was the first winner of the Joe Neal Award, Outstanding Volunteer, and we worked together a little bit on that. And of course, then when I mentioned the name Joe Neal, he was chairman of the opening ceremonies for a number of years.
Right. Well, Joe was another one of our stalwarts, and so many of them in the state games. There, like you mentioned, there's 2,500 volunteers, and we had a whole lot of committees. And Joe was another guy that carried a heck of a load, and when he passed, we named a Volunteer of the Year award in his memory, and I think Murph was the first recipient of that. And I might also mention another old friend named Harlan Johnston stepped up and said that he'd like to fill that void left by Joe's passing, and so we got a chance to get Murph back, or to get Harlan back into the fold.
All right, yes, I had conversation with Joe, and he was worried about how this was going to come about, and I said, Joe, don't worry about it. Let me just step in, and then I got back in the games. Okay.
And still are, by the way.
Well, yes, yeah. Now, how does Nebraska stack up with the rest of the games around the country?
Well, it's really interesting that back in the early years, when I was going to the national conventions, and the Eastern Bloc of state games had a different philosophy, and they were all New York and Massachusetts, Florida, and a few of those that were running the show. They put their emphasis on Olympic development, and their notion was that the state games would be an Olympic development organization, and tried to. We weren't going to get full membership in the national organization if we didn't conform with that. Well, some of us that out here in Nebraska, we don't have maybe two Olympians every 4 years. And our program is designed for participation for all ages, all skill levels, and all Nebraskans. We have a place for them. And we had a little bit of a revolt at a convention in Billings, Montana that year, several years ago, and deposed that board. And and I got to admit, I had something to do with that.
I couldn't believe that.
Anyway, Nebraska then became the model for the rest of the national movement, and we became teachers going to the conventions, and we've always had, in numbers-wise, top couple in the country, but on a per capita basis, nobody was close.
Okay, numbers, of course, were there, kept growing into the tens of thousands, and so, yes, very successful. Now, you retired in 2004, but you did it on your own time, and you had a staff all put together that could take over, right?
Well, this was one of the most rewarding parts of the whole deal. Is I got 3 young guys that I hired right out of college. Dave Monerick is now the executive director. My son Scott is the operations manager, and Pat Hagedorn, we lovingly call him Linus, was kind of the do everything guy in there. They all started out as running the torch run across the state, as torch run coordinators. And I trained them up, and they're very good students, and really bought into what the games is all about, and attention to detail resonated with them, and so it was really easy when the time came. They were willing to take more risks than I was, and I'd gotten old and crotchety and more conservative in my ways, and they wanted to do some more things, and so it was really a good time to hand it off, and I got a chance to kind of pick my successors, and I'm just proud as could be that these guys were ready to take off and do their own thing, and I didn't really never look back on that, because I wouldn't ever do that to them. Look over their shoulders, because they needed to be able to make their own mistakes and enjoy their own successes. So I'm very proud of those guys.
You developed them very well, and they've gone on to add new things to the game. Now, this year's games, I'd have to admit, are coming up July 18th to 26th. But then next year is the National Games will be here in Lincoln. And that's coming up in August in 2015. A coup for Lincoln as far as being able to host that. So you've laid a good foundation for the Cornhusker State Games to go on and be able to come up and host the National Games.
Well, these young ones took it, they took it and ran with it, and I got to see their bid package for the Dave and Scott and Jeff Mall from the Convention Bureau outbid San Diego for the National State Games
That's
of America.
A small coup in itself, yeah.
Right, and I saw their bid package, and it was an amazing piece of work, and I was very, very proud that these were the guys that took off with this thing.
Well, Tom, thank you for all of your years of leadership of the Cornhusker State Games, and thanks for coming and sharing about some facts about the 30th anniversary of the Cornhusker State Games. And remember, it's never too late to live and learn.
Anyone who lived in Lincoln in 1958 and this whole general area was terrified with the rampage of Charlie Starkweather. Well, a new book has been written by John Stevens Barry Sr. and Linda Battisti, and it's called The 12th Victim. They are claiming that Caril Fugate was the 12th victim. John Stevens Barry, so glad you have written this book. What prompted you to do that?
Well, there were a number of considerations, and there are people, of course, who wish the book would not be written. Mm-hmm. And Linda and I did not want to reopen wounds. We didn't want to hurt anybody. But Caril has the right to have her story told during her lifetime. So people say to me, why do you do it now, after all this time?
56 years it's been.
But it was her choice, for the first time in her life, to cooperate with authors, to work with authors, to get her story told during her lifetime. And it was something that was in her, and Linda worked with her for years, and then got me involved in it for a period of almost 10 years.
Well, I must admit it's a page turner. Let's take a look at Caril and Charlie Starkweather back at the time when before they were arrested. So she was only 14 at the time.
Yes.
So how much does a 14-year-old girl know what's happening to her?
Right now, we realize the difference between the adolescent brain development and the mature brain development. But when you take a girl like Caril, who grew up with no advantages, had to repeat a grade in school, lived her early life with an outhouse rather than indoor plumbing, and suddenly is seized as she was by Starkweather, and then later equally seized on by seasoned prosecutors who should have known better.
Do you think that she was tried in the court of public opinion?
Absolutely.
Because even when I say something about Caril Fugate today, or the fact that you've written a new book, they say, she should have been sitting on Charlie Starkweather's lap when he was executed. That's what Charlie said in the book. Those were, not in the book, those were out of his words.
Yes, isn't it amazing that people in Nebraska who can't quote from the Bible or Shakespeare or the Constitution or the Declaration of Independence, they're proud that they can quote Charlie Starkweather. And the guys who say she should have sat on his lap, I think it makes them think they sound tough. And I think it makes the women think they sound wise. But it makes them all sound like idiots for parodying the words of a mass murderer. They parrot the words of a mass murderer, and they think it makes them intelligent.
You tape recorded Caril on KLIN radio several years ago.
Yes.
How did that come to pass? She's up in Michigan, how would she be calling KLIN radio?
It was because Jim MacArthur, and of course he and his father John MacArthur and so forth had represented her. He had just come back from the Board of Pardons. They had refused to grant her a pardon, and she called Jim, and Jim was my guest. And someone told her he's on the radio show, and she said, "What show?" And she called in. Well, immediately, of course, that changed everything. And the calls that I got, it wasn't announced. Girls calling in saying, "I saw you hiding from Starkweather. I saw how he dragged you off the bus. I saw you trying to escape him, but my parents wouldn't let me tell anyone, or I told the cops and they wouldn't listen. Or my dad went out there, there's no way that killing occurred inside of that house." People coming up with information. I was startled because, as with everybody else in Nebraska, I had assumed she was guilty. I had had that assumption. I didn't pay much attention. Her case came when I was an undergraduate in California, at Palo Alto, California, so how would I have known very much about it? The thing that amazes me is that his testimony was treated, and I've not only read the record and the statements and done a lot of other investigation, but I've read all the newspapers. And the newspapers treated his testimony as if it were the absolute truth. The fact that he had killed 11 people, was going to the electric chair, and people quoted his words as if they were true, and that was the atmosphere in which she went to trial.
Well, let's take a look at her, and one of the sheriffs, I believe, as they're picking her up and taking her in. You know, she looks so little, well, she was only 14. And would you please explain the Miranda law, which did not exist at the time when Caril was going to be interrogated?
Yes. What happened was that, you know, we've always had the right against self-incrimination in the Fifth Amendment, and we've always had the right to effective assistance of counsel. But it took until 1966, under the Earl Warren Court in Miranda, for the court to say, wait a minute, once a person is in custodial interrogation, they have to be warned of two things: that they don't have to talk, and they've got the right to a lawyer, and a lawyer will be furnished.
And not to incriminate themselves.
Yeah. And of course, she wasn't told anything like this.
She was only 14. She didn't have an attorney at first, and she was just telling her version of the story. I mean, blathering, you know, as a 14-year-old girl would.
She didn't even know she was in custody. Remember, she ran to the sheriff's vehicle.
Yeah.
She wasn't arrested. She wasn't apprehended. She ran as fast as she could to get to the authorities. She turned herself, she was babbling, she was incoherent. She said, he's going to kill me, he's going to kill my family, you've got to stop him, please stop him. And so what do? They take her in and grill her, and they keep grilling her, and the Lincoln authorities come out and lock her up in a mental hospital, and she has to watch women taking shock treatments, and then they grill her some more.
Mm-hmm. We have a picture of her in a cell. We think this is in Gearing, Nebraska.
That's right.
Not Gearing, Nebraska, but actually after the murders that were out in Colorado and the way coming back.
Well, yeah. You see, what happened was she got away in Wyoming and ran to. This happened to be a police car there.
Yeah.
She would have been so much better off if it had been a private citizen she ran to. But she thought, well, police are safe, they're honest, they're good. And so she ran to them. And history would be different if she had run to some good Samaritan civilian.
Tell about Sheriff Carnoff asking her if she wanted to write a letter. Apparently he had said to her, do you want to talk to Charlie? And she said, no, I hate him. And then he said, well, why don't you write a letter? So she wrote the letter to Charlie.
This is the most disgusting part of the whole case. Starkweather made 11 statements, 9 of them before the trials, one in each trial. Well, his 6th statement was on February 1, and he said, I killed Caril's parents before she came home. She didn't know her family was dead. I was completely responsible. She was innocent. This is on February 1st. On February 3rd, she was going to appear in court. And it was just a period of time before an attorney would be appointed for her. So the prosecutors, Elmer Shield, and here's the sheriff working for him, go, and they're grilling her as much as they can before she gets a lawyer. They're working her over. They have it's like 150 pages of the statement. It still doesn't become a confession. On page 126, they say, by the way, you have the right to remain silent. They say that on. But anyway, while all this is going on, they say, aha, but once she gets a lawyer, how can we manipulate her? So on February 1st, Starkweather says, nah, she didn't have anything to do with the death of her parents. On February 2nd, because they're going to court on February 3rd, they get her to write a letter to Charlie saying, I never want to see you again.
I hate you for what you've done.
Yes.
I never want to see you. And that was hand-delivered, I believe, to Charlie.
He was hand-delivered.
They don't allow prisoners to exchange little billy-doos, do they? Notes.
Not hand-delivered. I mean, if a prisoner wants to write to another prisoner, there's a strict procedure. Yeah. But the sheriff got in there, got her to write it, ran it over to Charlie, got him to change his story, and from then on, she was a murderer, she was a killer, all kinds of things. But they did that because they knew she was going to get a lawyer and he was going to get a lawyer, and their time of manipulation was over. I think that's about as vicious a case of bullying as I've seen, to be honest about it.
Well, we all know that Charlie got the electric chair and Caril got life in prison at the York Women's Prison. And she was there for 18 years, I do believe. We have a picture of her looking sad, looking.
Yeah, it's a very pensive look. But if I may, during those 18 years, she was trusted. During the day, she would do a nursery school for a local church, and she would teach Bible school on Sundays. She delivered sermons. As part of her work release, she was in training for geriatric care. And she pretty much could let herself in and out anytime she wanted. She was totally trusted. And then when she got out, she got 2 jobs. She was a surgical orderly during the day, and the evening she was nanny for 2 small children. This is not consistent with the Caril Fugate that people in a bar next to you will say, she should have sat on his lap.
Well, if she got the death or the life imprisonment, How did she get out in 18 years?
It was interesting. One of the women officials in the prison system said to the Board of Paroles, "You've had your pound of flesh. She's been a model prisoner. She's been perfect. Get her out of here and get her into society. She'll never give you any trouble." And of course she didn't.
And of course she could not stay in Nebraska, so she went to Michigan.
Michigan initially, yeah.
And became an orderly in a hospital?
Yes, she was a surgical orderly and a nanny. And she'd worked 2 jobs, just loved it.
Now, there was a fascinating little thing that I read that apparently Caril had written some letters to her parents or to her mom while she was in jail.
Yes.
And she gave them to the sheriff's wife, Sheriff Knarf's wife. And they wound up in a garage sale. And you people got hold of those letters that were in the garage sale?
Yeah. There were two scenarios. One is, these were letters that were written. The ones at the garage sale were written to Caril from all over the country. People supporting her, sending her Bibles. She never saw any of those, and somebody bought them at a garage sale. Carnoff's wife had put them all in a box, and Caril never saw another one. And then there was a letter she wrote from the mental hospital to her mother, because she hadn't, even though someone had said, your parents are dead, none of this, things weren't quite registering, so she wrote a letter, "Why don't you come and see me?" And then she left it in her bedstand, and somebody found it, but they didn't turn it over to the defense. And I got it from the county attorney's office through the Freedom of Information Act.
It was interesting to note that they said that the jurors, those people who would be trying Caril at the trial, decided on the punishment first before they looked at the evidence. They decided whether she should go to the electric chair or have life in prison. And some of the jurors said, well, she's only 14, so therefore we shouldn't give her the electric chair, so we'll put her life in prison. Then they went back and began to determine whether she was innocent or guilty. I couldn't believe that. That was so difficult to believe.
It was
our jury, our Nebraska jurors did that.
It was I think the jury, just like the entire prosecution team, knew what the public wanted and what the public expected. And so I think that she was convicted before she set one foot in that courtroom. I think he was treated, Starkweather, on his way to the electric chair, was treated better than she was in that courtroom. And interestingly, and you've seen, since you've read the book, you've read the affidavit of the person who heard him being coached before his testimony, and the little suggestions that maybe if she was convicted, he might not get the death, he might not have to go to the electric chair and so forth. I mean, this guy signed an affidavit, and there was nothing in it for him. He'd served his time. He just signed, here's what I heard.
Well, here it is 56 years later, and we're still discussing Starkweather and Caril Fugate. Now, just quickly bring us up to date on Caril today.
Well, she was married. She got married, I believe, in 2007, and she and Fred had the best life they could. And then within the past year, he was driving back from somewhere, and the car rolled. And he died in the accident, and she was hospitalized and was injured. And Caril, although in the book, she completely opens her soul to us as to her entire life up through the trial. She is wanting a little privacy now for exactly where she is and her physical condition. So I have to keep my word to her, and I have to simply say that she's spent some time being hospitalized. She was very badly injured, and
she'd be approaching about 70 now, wouldn't she?
Well, she's getting. Let's do the math. She was 14 in 1958, so she. It's
been a hard life.
Yeah,
been a hard life. I must admit, it's a page-turning book. The book is The 12th Victim. It's the innocence. They're taking that point of view of Caril Fugate, that she was Charlie's 12th victim. Linda Battisti is the author, and John Stevens Barry, Senior. No, your son's an attorney. Everybody's an attorney. Both Caril and you are attorneys. And of course, another book that was written a long time ago, which I read, Caril, by Nanette Beaver, KMTV in Omaha, and John's book, Those Gallant Men on Trial in Vietnam. So you have been very productive. I'm glad you wrote this book. I'm sure it was a tough book to write.
It was hard to write, and it was difficult. Caril would come into my office and we'd go over things, and she'd end up crying. She'd end up being upset. It was very difficult for her, but she insisted on cooperating with me and Linda. She said there has to be some author somewhere in the world that I've talked to.
Well, and you've done it. The 12th Victim is available now on Amazon.com and then the bookstores. John Stevens Barry, Sr., thank you for being our guest on Live and Learn today.
Thank you so much for inviting me. It's good to see you again.
Good to be seen. And remember, it's never too late to read and learn.